Solitaire Rose Radio, Episode 31. Matthew James Daley and Trevor Crafts of Lantern City. I've talked in the past about how I'm a professional wrestling fan. I like comics, I like pro wrestling, I like novels, I like movies. And when I become a fan of something, I want to find out what's going on, what's coming out, what things like that. And Joe and I on Crazy Comics and Stories have talked about how we're both members. We've bought memberships in a website called pwinsider.com. They are pretty much the best in the business that I have been able to find. But the other thing that they do is they record audio shows. They answer questions from listeners. They talk about what's going on in the business. They talk about their lives. In a lot of ways, what they do is podcasting, but they call it audio, and you can't get it via iTunes or anything. You have to pay for a subscription to the site, and then you can download the audios. And they've been doing that for over 10 years, because I remember back, it had to be like 2001, 2002, buying a membership so I could listen to the audios, long before there was anything called podcasts. And the owner of the site, Dave Shearer, mentioned on one of his audios that his brother-in-law had a comic book coming out. And he mentioned Lantern City. And then I was looking on Bleeding Cool, because I like to get that inside comic news, and yes, I realize it's a gossip site, but they also have some solid information. They do some sales analysis. There are a lot of things that go on at Bleeding Cool, more than just being the National Enquirer of the comics business. And one of the things they said was Lantern City is Archaea's #1 selling comic ever. Their best-selling first issue. So I emailed Dave and said, hey, Joe and I, we would love to take a look at the comic, review it for our show. He said he would get me in touch with his baby sister and her husband, who are the ones doing the comic. And instead of just sending me a copy of the comic, which they did, they offered an interview. One of the things about Solitaire Rose Radio is that I'm looking for interesting stories. I'm looking for people who have an interesting story. And the more that I heard about Lantern City and the more that I found out about it, and after reading the comic itself, there's a very interesting story about how the comic came to be, how it fits in with a number of media properties, and almost kind of a new way of using comics as a storytelling medium combined with other storytelling mediums. And I think as comics evolve, and as the readership evolves, and as things change, it used to be that if it was based on a comic book, we're not going to watch that. They're not going to pour a lot of money into it. It's rather dismissed. Now, based on a comic book, can get you into meetings, can get you on the air, can get you a built-in fan base. So I talked to Matthew and Trevor about the comic, about the illustrated novel it's from, and about the proposed TV series. I was really impressed by how polished they were. They made the interview easy. All I had to do was ask a few questions and just sit back and let them run the show. But also as how good the comic actually was. Because a lot of times when people from outside comics come in and do a comic, it really feels like they took a script and gave it to an artist and had the artist try to make a comic out of it. But instead, this is a really good comic. And as I found out in the interview, everybody involved has been involved in comics in some way or another, either as a fan or, in the case of the artist and the co-writer Paul Jenkins, they've done a lot of comics in the past. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. I had heard on Rich Johnson's site, which is the rumor site, Bleeding Cool, that you guys were the highest selling Arcadia comic ever.
Yeah, we're the highest launching series in the history of Archaea. And that's, we're just incredibly honored that that's the case. We actually came to, I've been a fan of Archaea comics for quite a long time. I mean, they do a lot of Jim Henson, and the quality of the books that Archaea had done was always just super top notch. I'd always seen them at Comic-Con. They had a huge booth at Comic-Con, and in their day, they were the #1 graphic novel publisher in the U.S. And obviously they were acquired in 2013 by Boom, and we're just really proud to be on the Archaea imprint. Everybody at Boom, across the board is great, but it's a special badge of honor to be part of the Archaea group.
Oh, absolutely. We went to Comic-Con in 2012. I remember we spent quite a bit of time at the Archaea booth, and we're talking about how gorgeous the books were, and even said, oh man, it would be great to do a Lantern City book with these guys. And 3 years later, we're there.
We're doing
and not only that,
Yeah.
but their highest launching title, which is, I mean, such a badge of honor, obviously.
Yeah. And also to have it, in terms of just, having a continuing series, I think is something that is also new for them. Archaea started, I think, since they did so much graphic novel publishing, having something that is ongoing, that's a monthly, is also just so great, because just in terms of the story that we can tell, we're not bound by, a specific page count. We can just really extend that story, and fans can count on it every single month. That's really the benefit of going with a big publisher like Boom, is that, the distribution's there, their relationship with Diamond is great. And, Matt and I were actually just down in Virginia, in Richmond, on press to watch, Lantern City #1 come off of the machine, which was pretty awesome, to see it actually ink hit paper. But that's, it's all, it's about making sure that fans get the content every single month. And that's what's additionally exciting for us, is that we know that everybody's going to get their comics, which is great.
One of the things I found out is that you guys you put out a novel first, an illustrated novel.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the information at San Diego, and you've really built up a big social network following. And the novel takes part kind of in the history. It's kind of the prequel to the comic, if I'm reading right.
It is. It absolutely is. It tells the story of the founder of Lantern City, and it was important for us to tell that story for fans, and even for ourselves. We needed to have those things in place. We didn't want to sort of start immediate race and then try to figure out the mythology later on. We wanted to have the mythology and the history beforehand. Both Trevor and I are really big on all different historical eras and movements and everything. It's a passion for both of us, and that's not only true in the real world. We also are really interested in the worlds that we are creating. We need to have the T's crossed and the I's dotted, because if we don't think of it, someone will, and we'll get a question, and you never want to be without an answer.
Mr. Daley, in issue #6, there, you'll get those questions at Comic-Con. They will come up. Somebody will go to the mic and they will call out your inconsistency very publicly. And we don't want to do that in Hall H next year. We want to make sure that that's not the case.
And even though we've been putting material out, there's still a lot of the world building that's really just internal stuff, so that we know, and that it's nice because we can check back and forth with ourselves just to make sure that we aren't screwing things up.
Yeah, Matt called me the other day and said, how do you spell the river that goes through the middle of Lantern City?
Okay.
So we're always checking ourselves. But I think, the other thing about putting Rise out, which was important to us, is, as you said, we have a big social network, and we have, a lot of fans. We have, over 100,000 fans on Facebook and 100,000 fans on Twitter. And it's really important to us to make sure that all of our fans are getting the content that they want. It's not just that they love steampunk, which they do, but a lot of these fans are really just fans of good stories and epic storytelling. And, as we've started originally as a television concept, and we're continuing to develop the show. We're taking meetings every week with different producers and different showrunners and different distribution outlets. But until that time where we actually are on at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, we want to make sure that fans have enough content to really get into the meat of Lantern City so they're that much more ready when the TV show hits the air.
And the one thing I've discovered in the build-up to the release of the first issue, especially in a lot of the social media communication we've had, which has been really fantastic, is a lot of people who are already following us or have read Rise or pre-ordered the comic book aren't all that familiar with steampunk. They're just hungry for more original science fiction.
Right.
Which is great because we always knew that we would be able to, and this is not necessarily a guarantee, but we always had a very strong sense that we would get steampunk fans just because it's a huge original steampunk universe. Our concern was always, are we going to get people who aren't familiar with steampunk? And we are, which is great.
And I think that's the other part of this that is, important about Lantern City. It is science fiction. It is a fantastic world. And all science fiction doesn't have to be pegged into, the very specific tropes of, spaceships and, interstellar travel and all of that. I mean, there's a lot of other places that are still science fiction that I think people are craving for, like Matt said, that original world that's totally unique, and they get to be a part of it from the ground floor.
I wanted to get into a little more about how the idea came from. I read through you kind of discovering comic books in 1988.
Yes.
Which depresses me because I was already working at a comic shop then and had been collecting for ages. But as you read through, most kids when they first see comics, it's the superhero stuff. And then if you stay in it, you kind of filter out into the other genres. So what I wanted to ask was, first off, what were the genres that you were really pulled into as you discovered the world outside of Marvel and DC? And then second, where did the kind of the kernel of the idea for Lantern City show up? Was it something that when you were 14 you had bits and pieces, or when you're older it's like, I want to tell the story of this person and I need to create a world around them?
Well, I'd say I'll let Trevor answer the kernel of idea for Lantern City because this is his baby that he's.
Oh, okay.
But with the sort of comic book reading habits, I started with Marvel and DC because of Batman, but Marvel I was really into Daredevil and Punisher, and I still like those titles. But my first my independent read was The Crow, and then after reading The Crow, then I really got into the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman, which is still hugely influential for me. I mark it as one of the greatest literary influences, not just comic book influence. I just think it's so great. And then after that is, for me, more not until I really got into college when I started to branch out and read non-genre specific comic books, going back and looking at some great works, even like Mouse and Persepolis and Blankets and things like those, just because I guess I was sort of even stuck in, even though I was a big comic book fan, I was looking at comic books only as one thing. But then I got very interested in some crime stuff, especially some of the Frank Miller and Ed Brubaker stuff. And now, I mean, what's great about writing a comic book is there's just always excuses just to read more comic books, which is awesome. And I know there's Golden Age and Silver Age and all that stuff, but this is such a great time in comic book writing, I think. I feel like television and comic books are in such a great spot right now because you have so many smart people working in the field, here's maybe a real obvious thing or maybe not, but I try to seek out two comic book series that I think should only be comic book series, maybe. Where it works so well, like Trevor and I are huge fans of Low and Black Science, which obviously you could have a movie or TV series with those, but they just work
really hard.
But they just work so well. And I love Saga. I think it's so tremendous. It's just so great. And like a series like Scalped, I loved. And, Scalped maybe would be an obvious, you could do a TV series with that. There's just something about it just works so nicely as a comic book. And not that I need my things divided into neat categories, but, sometimes when I'm reading some Marvel and DC stuff, I feel like this is all just fodder to get me to pony up $15 when the movie comes out.
Right.
Although I did spend a lot of time recently going back through and reading a lot of Daredevil from Frank Miller on. And the last thing I just read this past weekend was some of the Mark Waid stuff. And, I think there's some freedom maybe in some of the lesser characters. Well, now Daredevil isn't a lesser character, but there's a little bit of freedom sometime in these lesser characters when it's not the movie franchise that you have to worry about. You can just write great series. That's kind of what I've been looking for as of late. But now we get into the Lantern City thing, and I'll let Trevor start because this was his Spock.
It was. Well,
oh, okay.
And also, I mean, it's, for me, comic books, I definitely also started with comic books as well. I was like, just recently I reached out to the manager of the comic book store in Bowie, Maryland, where I grew up, and I would sit and do boards and backs. I think it was like basically like slave labor, I think, essentially. But I got a couple free comic books out of it, which was pretty great. And I think that for, creating Lantern City, I mean, I always started with Dark Horse. That was really for me, like some of the world extension that had been done early in the 90s with Terminator and Predator and just like these, I'd seen the movies and the movies were amazing and Aliens. And then you had these sort of additional worlds that were being made that were just phenomenal. I mean, it was just so much of an extension. And I think that for Lantern City, I had a very simple, small little idea one day about just a normal, average guy whose fiance just disappears, and the lengths that he would go to be with her for another minute. And it kind of sort of was around this sort of Victorian box, and I just thought it was an interesting story. It was sort of a dimensional travel story, just something where, you always sort of know, if you're in a long distance relationship, how many times a day would you call somebody? How many hours would you fly to be with them? But at the same time, it's also, would you be able to throw away everything you believe to be with that person? Your ideas about science and religion and everything. So that was kind of the core of the idea. And I think it sort of solidified in 2011 when I went to Comic-Con and I saw all the people that were cosplaying as with steampunk. And it just kind of clicked that steampunk is this interesting group of people that don't have, sort of a media flag. There's no steampunk TV show. There's no real good true steampunk movie. There's nothing that they have, and they've sort of developed this whole world on their own. And what an amazing opportunity to really galvanize this whole movement of fans. And that sort of was the sort of very early kernels of Lantern City. And I put together some characters, and then essentially brought Matt in. Matt and I had been friends for a number of years and had been looking to partner on a project together. And essentially Matt took this sort of little kernel of an idea, sort of the main characters, and then expanded it out into the big wide world that you see on the pages today.
The thing that jumped out at me as I read the first issue was that there's room for social commentary. It's with the different strata of the society. Mm-hmm. There's romance. There's revolution. There are all these different elements that it would be, if I sat down and said, here are all the things that I want to put into a story, you would go, well, no, that's too much. Strip that out, strip that out, strip that out. But you're really good about starting with one person, then his relationship and how he, I think the opening sequence where he's working and one of the older gentlemen is singing to make the work a little easier. And each sequence sort of branches out from him. He's our through character. we learn the world, we learn the oppression, we learn the social strata, we learn this. Did you start from that? Is that the character that you said, he is my guy? Now, how did this world come to be? So there's a novel. And the press release says it's a 12-issue series, but the fact that it's ongoing has me both excited and scared. Excited in that this is such a fun world to play in, but scared in that I don't want it to be where, okay, we're 7 years in and he's still, questing.
Well, I mean, I think
And that's the longest question I think I've asked in months.
Yeah. Okay.
So did it start from him and work outward, or what was the genesis?
I'll say one thing, I think, to sort of your end point. And Matt is the one that originated this story, and I'll let you tell him how, him tell you how we got there. But one thing I'll say about this comic series is that the great thing about Lantern City is that the title of this sort of overall franchise is Lantern City. It's not The Sander Show or, Isaac Foster Gray, the novel. It's about the city, and it's about the evolution of this amazing place and all the different people that interact with it over centuries, both from, the world of Lantern City and also people in our world that travel over. So the storyline of the comic book is actually quite different, and there are some similar characters. Some of the characters are the same, but the TV show is actually different than the comic, and that was different than Rise. So as we get to play in this great sort of big transmedia space of comics and games and books and TV shows and everything else that sort of coalesces between them, is that each one of these storylines is unique, and we get to follow a different character set. But ultimately, sort of back to the core idea, all of these characters are really all circling around sort of these two main questions. How far would you be willing to go to be with the person you love the most? And, essentially, how much would you change to survive? And those are really the sort of two core questions that any version of Lantern City, they always ask. So to your point about like this one guy that then, branches out into this bigger world, I think that's sort of the key to our storytelling style, is that it's always about one person. It's always about one group and how that group interacts with the rest. And I mean, originally the comic wasn't really a comic.
Yeah, so when I was presented originally with the idea, the first thing that I really thought was important was to know who the characters are. So we really rapped back and forth a lot about that. And then it was all about building the world. And once you get into so many of the nitty-gritties of the world and understand the world, and then it's who are the people that live there and how do they behave and what do they do, what do they eat, what gets them sick, what do they believe in, what do they fight for, and all those things. And we wanted to develop a series of short stories all set in Lantern City. And what happened is
What happened is you don't write short.
Okay.
That's what happened.
I was trying to be nice. I was trying to be nice
Nope.
to myself.
Nope.
Yeah, so I'm good or bad, and I'll just say it's good.
It's good. It's good.
I'm not really great at writing short pieces. I'm not a good poet. I'm not a good songwriter. I'm not a good short story writer. But this character that I created, this was last spring, summer,
yeah.
By the name of Sander. I wanted a character that could navigate all three strata of Lantern City, and in a natural way, because it doesn't really happen otherwise. Because there's so many sort of barricades set up for you to go from one to the other. But I came up with this storyline for this character to make his way through, and it was supposed to be a short story, probably no more than 10,000 words, and I got about 40,000 words in, and I haven't really hit the points of the first arc for the character.
You said this is the first chapter. I was like, the what?
Yeah. And just at that time is when we had begun our talks with Boom and Archaea, which was really nice, because when we presented to them, they loved the project, but they didn't necessarily want us to do the TV storylines, only because, giving fans more, because they do a lot of pre-existing properties, but they don't do, like they're doing Sons of Anarchy. It's not what you see on the TV show, or Sleepy Hollow. It's not what you see in the TV show. So that's sort of their angle with it, which is cool. I guess not
It
too.
worked for us. I mean, we wanted it to be an extension of, not to be,
Yeah.
a replacement. So.
Somewhat similar, I guess, to what Dark Horse used to do back in the day. And so I don't have that many examples off the top of my head, but I really love inside or outside characters. One of my favorite movies ever is Goodfellas, and Henry Hill is the ultimate insider outsider because he's an insider to the world and a great tour guy, but he's an outsider because he can never be a real member of that world. And that's very true with our main character in a couple of different scenarios. I try to ratchet it up a little bit, and I think it's really important for our readers as they follow him along his journey to see that he's so close so many times to being an insider, but there's really only one place he can truly be an insider, not also be an outsider. But it might not even be the place that he can, where he can actually be. So it's, and don't worry, there won't be 7 straight years of just him trying to get there. I mean, we'll get him there, and then it'll be a lot of other interesting things that happen along the way.
And the good thing about, because the city is so vast, we may have Sanders' storyline end and have him be a reoccurring character and then bring in, a new central protagonist or, a different group. It's not just Lantern City. There are, even though it's a walled city, if you imagine, Boston and DC and Philly and New York all smashed together with a big, huge stone wall around it, where no one gets in and no one gets out, unless they're heavily supervised. And all of the media is essentially controlled by the state. You have a populace that doesn't know why the wall was built. Everybody has their ideas and the old legends and the theories, but, after 200 some odd years of state-controlled media, the populace doesn't really know why there's a wall. Yeah, it's designed to protect them. That's what everybody sort of thinks. That's the go-to answer. But is there anything around the wall? I mean, to the citizens, they can't see out. They don't even know. So it's an interesting place that this world that we've created, they can go as far out. We could bring it outside of the wall to explore the rest of, the surrounding area, the world. And we could, the city's so vast, we could do a full series on every single different district of Lantern City, or each one of the, we could pick one of the members of the Grey Empire to go with. That's just the great thing about the world that we've built, is it's really, really big.
And the one thing is, in the almost full time for 3 years, we've been working on this project, and we have a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories that we know we wouldn't be able to tell even on the TV series. So it's nice that, we have the opportunity through the comic book, because I think once people get into it, they're going to want to explore more, almost like what you're saying about being scared. I think they're going to want to see more than just what Sander offers, even though I think he's a great introductory character to bring us into the world.
You've also got Paul Jenkins working on this. And since this is your first comic, was it helpful to have somebody who's more experienced both working at the majors and working at the smaller stuff and doing self-published stuff through Image? Was that helpful to sort of navigate? Because comics are a weird world, not just the form, but the business. I always try to explain the business to people outside comics, and they look at me as if I've lost my mind. Was he helpful in sort of navigating that?
Oh, absolutely.
And what do you think he brings to the series?
I was a complete novice in terms of writing comic books, and I've been reading them since I was 7. But it doesn't mean I know how to write that. It's the same thing with people like, oh, I like to watch movies. I could write a movie easily. And then, it's garbage. It's like 400 pages of garbage. It's like, the script is 90 pages, friend. So the great thing about being paired with Paul on issue number 1 is that it was a crash course. It was like a graduate seminar on comic book writing. You couldn't go to a school and get like this education in such a short amount of time. And for me, obviously everyone who creates has ego and stuff, but when you can put that aside, which I was able to do, and just really open up and listen and say, this is how it's done. These are the beats. This is the sort of like the good structure and style that works, and everything just sort of fell into place. It's almost like, when Neo sees the Matrix, like, oh, okay, so that makes sense. I understand now. And then just really on a term that he used a lot, which was great, and I'll steal and use forever, is just he kept saying the economics of comic book storytelling, because even for the original script that I did, it was twice as long as it needed to be, and we just like went back and we spent about 5 hours one day across from each other at a table, just like, let's break this down. Think about the economy of storytelling, why you don't need certain things and why you do need certain things, and then just finding the rhythms in that. It was great. It was, like I said, it was a tremendous experience.
The technical aspect that a lot of first-time writers don't seem to understand is how many words can you put in a balloon?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I can't tell you how many 80s comics where here's a novel next to a picture.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've always been interested in reading about creative people that I admire, and just even so I found some comic book authors and then some screenwriters and everything talking about how they sort of flubbed their first experiences because they just did it wrong. It's like, oh, you have the skills and you have some obvious talent, then you could do this. And then they get in there. It's like, oh, no, much like I did, like, here's a 45-page script for issue 1. Like, wait, what? No, it doesn't work that way.
And also, when we did our first sort of editorial creative meeting, Boom's editor-in-chief, Matt Gagnon, was there as well. And, we just sort of whiteboarded out, like, it was a very good visual sort of cue to say, oh, yeah, we have no space for balloons. We have so many panels on this one. But obviously, the other thing I think which is interesting, you talk about the business of comics and the creation of comics. I don't know of another creative medium which has less rules than comic book creation in terms of format and style, which I think makes it harder to break in because, with the script, it's like you got 3 holes and you put 2 grommets in it. And if you don't do it that way, then you're already at the bottom of the pile. Yeah. It's like there's definitely, there's software like, Final Draft or,
useless.
Yeah. For comic books, it's useless. And the same thing goes true for, how many panels should you have on a page? Well, there's recommendations, but, look at Matt Wagner and Grendel. He's like 1,000 on a page and it's awesome, or you look at some of the bigger Marvel books and, there's one page, there's one panel. I mean, so it all really is, to the user or the creator's specification. But I think that was also a hurdle, was just, there's really no reference of like, oh, you make comic book scripts this way, because there wasn't.
And my problem, because I ended up reading a lot of scripts in some of the absolute editions I have, some of the Sandman and Watchmen, and then so I looked at those like, well, these are really dense, but maybe that's okay. And so like, maybe I should go with one other contemporary writer who I really admire, and I happened to go with Jason Aaron, and I read one of his scripts, and it's also very dense. So in my mind, I was like, oh, comic book, these scripts can be dense, which is great. And then I was completely wrong, just because I'm not those guys.
You found the 3 guys that
I picked the
Well, go for an Alan Moore script.
I know.
He's legendary in the industry for, I think, Watchmen. He takes 3 pages to describe the first panel.
Yep. Yeah. And that script is in the Absolute Edition. I was like, oh, this is great.
Yes.
It's funny, Trevor said there's no specific format, which is true, but I think any editor or writer would know right off the bat if the person knew what they were doing.
Oh, absolutely.
And I didn't. So it's not like my prose was bad or my dialogue was bad. It's just like, this is not a comic book yet. So you got to get this thing into shape.
Yeah, but Paul was great about helping us to sort of see through the edges and get onto, a tight path. And Matt's cranking them out now, so it's all good.
Well, I'll tell you the trick that I did, which was great, is that when I wrote ended up writing 2 different scripts for the first issue before we had our first editorial meeting, and that was just me at my computer and writing. But what I did after that was I bought myself a sketchbook and I drew out every panel and then I fit my descriptions and dialogue inside each panel before I typed it to limit myself. I needed those restrictions.
Yeah, that
And
visual.
and maybe in 5 years from now, when I'm doing this a lot, writing a lot more issue, have a lot more issues, on my resume, it'll be I won't need to do that. But I like that. It just helps me to visualize. I think it's a lot smarter for me to do it that way.
The art, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how the art is just
You would be remiss.
beautifully
You
done.
would be remiss if you didn't talk about Carlos. Yeah.
The thing that's great about him, I don't know much about him, so I will be asking you to give me more about him. But what I liked is his people all looked different.
Yeah.
Everybody had personality in how they looked. But then when you go for the big scenes, it's very almost like late 70s metal hurlant heavy metal in how he makes the big things just really pop off the page. And what I wanted to ask was, first, where did you find him? And then, what is it like working with him? Did you give him full script? Did he come back? What was the process there?
If I could say one thing, because Trevor will take over this, but I think it was one of the things I liked about Carlos' style too. It has a nice old school flair, but then it's also contemporary enough where it doesn't necessarily feel like you just picked up, X-Men from 1980 or something.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and we found Carlos actually, he was recommended to us by Ross Ritchie, who's the president and founder of Boom. And, he's done tons of work for Marvel and DC. He's his style is very unique. And I think I had been familiar with him. He had done another book for Boom, Planet of the Apes, and which sort of was a middle prequel, I guess, to the original Planet of the Apes series. So happens well after the, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which just came out. So we found Carlos, I had known of his work through the Planet of the Apes comic that he had done for Boom. And in a meeting with Ross Ritchie, who's the president and founder of Boom, he mentioned to us that he was just coming off of RoboCop, which was another series that he had done for Boom and was available. And so we snatched him up because his conceptual design work is top notch. We had done some concept art for the TV show and we had done some concept art, for Rise. So we were able to sort of give him sort of that glimpse into the world. And then the amazing thing about Carlos is he just cranks pages. He does about 2 pages a day, which is almost unheard of.
Yeah.
And this is not kindergarten level sketches here. This is professional art, 2 pages a day. We're spoiled. We know we're spoiled.
Yeah, we'll be spoiled for the rest of our careers if we do more comics because he just, he's just pages after pages after pages. I will say issue 1 looks amazing, and I love issue 1. Issue 2 pretty much blew my mind. The amount of lines on paper is staggering. And the fun thing about Carlos is that we went back and forth a fair amount with issue 1 because it was our first shot. It was our first time working with him. So we really were trying to build that, very specific look and feel. Steampunk has a lot of different styles. And our version of steampunk is the Lantern City version of steampunk. It is still deeply rooted in all of the visual ideals of steampunk, but we also add in some other elements that sort of feel more like, Dune or Blade Runner, where, because of this massive city that everybody
Dark City
lives
too,
in. Yeah, Dark City. Carlos really nailed it. And it's been actually super fun because in the beginning we were sort of giving a lot of notes on the pages. And now we're pretty much just, as soon as we get the pages in from our editorial team at Boom, we just immediately say, this looks amazing. And I don't think we've had a comment recently at all, other than just, this looks great.
Yeah, we're already on inks for issue 4.
Pencils for issue 4.
Pencils for issue 4. So we're almost to the first arc with art. And so
it's pretty exciting. And he's just been, I was just recently chatting with him online, and he is just the nicest guy in the world also, which is a big plus. He loves working on Lantern City. I think the only downside is he lives in Brazil, and so I can't, buy him beers. But other than that, he's just been a really amazing asset. And I know that, everybody at Boom, when they went to Comics Pro, which is the industry convention, that was in Portland this last, March, I think.
March or February?
Yeah. February, end of February, I think. That was one of the things that got a lot of the shop owners excited was Carlos's art, because we had essentially a fully inked, version of Lantern City #1. So we were able to show that artwork to some of the buyers, and everybody got really excited, and for good reason. I mean, the stuff is amazing. Like I said, when you get to issue 2, hang on, your eyes may bleed.
I think that if one of the things that I like too, we talked a little bit just a few minutes ago about sort of the old school and new school aesthetics combined, is that when you look at his work in Planet of the Apes and RoboCop, you have, when you pick up an issue of Planet of the Apes, you have an aesthetic in mind because you've seen the films or the TV series or even the animated series.
Right.
But then he certainly respects that and builds off it so nicely. And RoboCop too. I mean, RoboCop is a little, obviously it's more, well, it's funny enough. All of them take place in the future, but it's at least
the future past.
Yeah, the future past.
It's a different future. It's a much shinier, more metallic, more corporate future.
Yeah, but he gets it. And for ours, I just think he nails it too. Just the different layers of it and everything. It's really exciting. I'm excited for you to see all the different sort of the different strata of society too, how it represents them.
And I think honestly, Carlos's art is amazing, but Chris Blythe, who's our colorist, has really, I think, set the bar up. His use of light in a static image, I think, is one of the things that drew us to him. Is that even though you have sort of these big cityscapes, you also have this sort of feeling of volumetric light, which I think you rarely get to this extent in comics. It just really feels very full and very real. It's been super exciting for us to sort of see it all come together. And also our letterer, Darren Bennett, has just, again, set the bar super high. It's laid out so well. It's so easy to follow. We're really incredibly lucky to have a super skilled team working on Lantern City, edge to edge.
And these guys have done such great work in servicing the story too. It's not, there's great art, but if it doesn't work with the story, then it's useless. But this really, I think, works excellent.
I was going to bring up the coloring. I did like the fact that as you go through the story, the palette gets darker. It's a subtle thing, but it's one of those subtle things that as a reader, you feel more and more claustrophobic as the story goes on, and which fits with the overall theme of the story, which builds to the last few pages where things change.
Right.
But that darkness, you feel more kind of, the panels are getting a little more constricted. You feel more crowded as you read it. And I really liked how that theme went through, sort of drawing the reader deeper and deeper into this city, which you become much more curious about. You're dropping hints about the fact that there's this wall, we don't know what's on the other side, and no one has told us.
Right.
And if it were like a 80s or 90s comic, I would fully expect an issue, okay, this issue is going to tell you what these people think is outside the wall. Then a few months later, here's what these people think. Boom, boom, boom. But I don't know if in today's market you could actually do those sort of like fill-in stories anymore. People just want the narrative to continue.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're doing now is on LanternCityTV.com, we've actually, I somehow managed to do this. I'm still not 100% sure how, but I managed to get Matt to write a short story. So on LanternCityTV.com, every week we're releasing, until the release of the comic book. So there'll be one that comes out tomorrow, and then the final chapter comes out next Tuesday on Sanders' origin story. So we sort of are trying to add in those additional narrative elements just in other forms of media to sort of fill in some of the gaps and maybe follow some characters that we can't really follow because, to your point, people like sort of that straight through narrative with lots of different characters, but still sort of the ongoing story. We're trying to add in those different elements, those just to help the reader sort of know the world a lot more. So this story called The Devil's Corner is really about Sanders' neighborhood and where he grew up as a teenager, and sort of gives you some early insight into him and his abilities, as we prepare to read about him as a grown man in the comic book.
Obviously, you can take things too far sometimes with giving too much information, but I was really excited about being able to tell at least one particular story about our main character when he's about 10 years younger than when he is in the comic book, and also gives a little bit of a profile of a different part of the city too, which was really nice.
One of the questions I wanted to ask, because comics are such, in a lot of ways, kind of a very insular world, what was it like your first time going to, not San Diego, because San Diego is its own monster, but going to kind of a smaller convention where you're not Batman, you're not Superman, you're not Spider-Man, so people are walking by kind of looking. And I'm always interested in, how did you pitch people on coming over and looking at the table, looking through the material you had?
Well,
and what was it like for you, not being in that world, stepping into the world of nerddom, as it were?
We've been in the world of nerddom for a long time. I don't think that's not new for us. I still have some of the bruises to prove it, I think, from my early days.
I have a very funny brief story, but when I was in college, my advisor for the honors school was interviewing me about class I was going to take my sophomore year, and about 5 minutes in the interview, she goes, "Oh my God, Matt, you're a nerd." I was like, yes. She's like, I didn't know. I was like, yeah. Well, there you have it.
I mean, the weird thing about our con experience is overall, we haven't really had a small table. When we launched the concept of Lantern City in 2012, and essentially pretty quickly after that, we were getting calls from cons all across the country to come and speak about Lantern City. At that point in time, we had sort of assembled a cast of supporting players. Raphael Savage and Mira Furlan and Tony Amendola, John Rhys-Davies, and a bunch of people that are wonderful genre actors, Gigi Edgley, who brought their own sort of fan bases with them. And as we sort of continued to talk, that fan base just grew bigger, and more cons wanted us to come and speak. One of the co-creator of Lantern City on the TV side is Bruce Boxleitner, who was Tron and John Sheridan in Babylon 5. And he and I had worked on a pilot in 2011 together. I was executive producing, and I brought him in as one of the leads. We just hit it off, and that was sort of one of the sort of interesting connection points for Lantern City that we had. I said, I'm working on this big epic series. This was right before we brought Matt in. I said, you obviously know about big epic series because you've been on some of them. And so we started, figuring out what we could do in terms of getting a bigger base, to sort of rally around Lantern City. And that's sort of one of the early ways that we got a little bit more visibility at some of the cons because, as certainly you said before about San Diego, it's a battle.
Yes.
It's not a con. It's like a war zone. And those 30 seconds, if you get 30 seconds of fame out of that, you're doing incredibly well.
Because we did San Diego, then we did Dragon Con in Atlanta, and then we did some in the spring, and we did Chicago. And it wasn't really until I spoke about Lantern City and Rise at Phoenix Comic Con in 2013, and that was such a different experience because everyone up to that point was sort of the fight. And when I got there, I had an escort. It was like treated like royalty. And I was like, oh, okay, this is fantastic. And we had like a nice big panel and all that stuff. So that was, I guess, it's not a small con necessarily, but it was certainly smaller than what we had experienced because we also did San Diego again and New York, and,
Yeah, we've done pretty much most of the majors, and and also some of the steampunk cons as well. Bruce and I did TeslaCon, which is up in Michigan, which is very cold, and it happens in December. But it's a sort of immersion con, and there were 1,800 people there, and that was definitely a smaller con, but it's such a wonderful, imaginative, dedicated group of people that run the con and all the people that attend. I mean, definitely one of the most attentive audiences. And our panel, we spoke to all 1,800, so that was definitely one of the bigger ones. So we also went to the Queen Mary steampunk convention as well, which was fun because it was on the Queen Mary down in Long Beach. And we had another great panel there. And it was great because a lot of the actors most of them are LA based, so we got a lot of them to come and speak at the panel also. So it's been sort of, I think, a sort of bigger con experiences for us. But as Matt and I are continuing to build other projects through Macrocosm, which was my production company, we were just at Artist Alley at C2E2, and we spent a lot of time just sort of going through the aisles and finding really top-notch talent for some of the other projects that we're working on. And it's real dedication. I mean, it takes a lot to get the sort of gumption up to sit there and have people pass you by and pass you by and pass you by. But I think that's also one of the great things about cons is that it can really connect fans and creators and artists together in a way that you don't really have that kind of access in any other arena. I mean, certainly social media has torn down a lot of those walls. But one of our cover artists, Dave Dorman, who I've been a fan of for years and years and years, back to when he was doing very similar illustrated novels to Rise with Dark Horse. He did some Star Wars and did a book, Aliens Tribes, and that was really phenomenal. I mean, it kind of was the inspiration for Rise to sort of use that same kind of a format. And when it came time to pick cover artists for Lantern City, I knew that Dave had to be one of them. And he did this gorgeous rendering of the Lantern City Guard helmet as one of the incentive covers for us. And we saw him at, C2E2, and it was great just to see him and, just talk about the cover and how much he enjoyed painting it and how much great press he's getting about it, and lots of feedback. And it's just nice to have this sort of big community relationship with the artists that we're working with. And that's what's so great about cons is you really just get a chance to really just pal around with your buddies, which is a lot of fun.
One of the things I always tell people about conventions is the artists are there to sell you their work. They want you to get excited about what they do. To them, they're there partly to have fun, but mostly because it's marketing. What sort of outreaches are you doing? Because 10,000 copies in comic shops is great for a property that comic shop owners don't know. But I know Boom is doing a thing called Push Comics Forward.
Yeah.
Where they're trying to open up new markets, try new genre, new format. And some of the stuff they're doing, like the Peanuts comic, was one of those where before it came out, I said, I don't want a Peanuts comic. No one should do that. But a couple issues in, I really enjoyed it. I look forward to it now. But that's not going to sell in a comic shop. That's going to sell online. It's going to sell in regular stores. What sort of marketing things are you doing to sort of get Lantern City out of comic shops? Not that there's anything wrong with that. To get to the steampunk people who don't go to comic shops or science fiction people or things like that.
If I could say one real quick thing about comic book shops, because we were talking about it so long ago and I just remembered, is, Trevor was talking about his first job working in a comic book store. Everyone I talk to who's a comic book reader and a comic book fan, they remember the stores they go to. Yeah, it feels like, sometimes you'll do that with movie theaters and stuff, but comic book shops have such an interesting way of just sort of branding themselves on our brain where we just remember the smells and everything it is. There's something about comic book shops, and we don't, it used to be true maybe for record stores. We don't really have those anymore. And Yeah, it's almost like a relic of the past. I love it though.
But I think that that's, it's that kind of, we want those memories for all of our readers. And it's true, steampunk readers haven't really had the opportunity to go to stores because there hasn't really been content that they can count on. Lady Mechanica is a great book and it does incredibly well, but it's not very consistent. And I think, it's sometimes months or a year between issues. And that's one thing that we wanted to make sure that everybody, could count on our book. I think that, with pushing comics forward, the steampunk is pushing comics forward. We have a whole new audience of people that are coming in. We're doing lots of different contests, but also we have something called the Workers Forum on LanternCityTV.com. And originally it was designed for the television show, but we're within the next issue or two, we're going to start essentially porting it over to the comic book. And essentially what it is since the steampunk audience is such a maker community, we're actually offering the opportunity to have that artistic work featured in the television series and also now in the comic book as well. So essentially you can submit your steampunk designs, your guns, your, whatever, brooches, dresses, light fixtures, transportation devices, whatever. If you've built it, you can submit it. And essentially, we'll pick the best of the best and have Carlos illustrate that prop, that piece of art, essentially into one of the panels of an upcoming issue. And we're going to do this consistently because really it is the steampunk movement and this maker community that really is the inspiration for all of Lantern City. So we really wanted to make sure that we could support that community and embrace that community and have them sort of add their imagination to our own. It's been an amazing response so far. We have about 50,000 users on the Worker Forum. We get tons of people that are posting and commenting. We actually one of our users, Looney, we actually met him at C2E2, which was actually quite a lot of fun. So he's been great in keeping all the activity on the forums up and commenting on everybody's stuff. He's definitely the head of the Lantern City forum, that's for sure. But it's been, having that opportunity to have this huge imaginative group and essentially feature them in all of our transmedia properties, I think is going to help to bring people into the world of Lantern City just from a comic book reader standpoint.
Yeah, and it really keeps me on my toes because when you see all the fantastic, things people built and all that stuff, it's, I better be imagining some really good things in the comic book and moving forward too, because if, if I don't, I'll hear about it. That's for sure.
Well, we're starting to run out of time. So what I'd like to ask is for each of you to give kind of your elevator pitch for Lantern City and what you think the average comic book reader would look forward to coming up, not just from Lantern City, but maybe anything else you're working on.
So the pitch for, sort of the quick blurb about Lantern City is, Lantern City is an epic, ongoing steampunk series that chronicles the struggle of one man as he tries to make a difference for his family and change the world around him. That's sort of the thrust of Lantern City.
Oh, what people can look forward to every issue. I think that one of the things that I pride myself on is developing really good characters, and I think that people will find that they can take this very interesting journey with characters that they want to spend time with. That's important to me. Obviously, we're hitting all the tricks of cliffhangers and all those things, but I really want people coming back for the characters.
Thank you so much for your time, and go out, pick up an issue of Lantern City. I read it and really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you all the listeners, too.
And that's the interview. I want to thank Matthew and Trevor for their time. I think they did a pretty outstanding job. And as I said in the interview, I have read the first issue of the comic, and I was very impressed. It takes a lot to get me impressed about a new comic. This was the perfect first issue. It set up the situation, it set up the world, and it gave enough hooks that I'm interested to see where it's going. So I'm going to recommend it. Whether you are a steampunk fan, or a science fiction fan, or just you listen to this because you like funny books. Speaking of liking funny books, Jeremy Rathbone, who I interviewed a while back, has resubmitted his Saga of the Robo Vikings. And while there wasn't enough time to get an interview with him for his Kickstarter, he did put together an ad, and I am posting his interview out on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/Corey.Strode, you can see that interview there. But he also put together a nice little ad to let the listeners know that the Saga of the Robo Vikings is back up on Kickstarter.
In a far distant time, a savage age ruled. An unstoppable force swept across the land. They came from over the binary seas, from a cold wasteland of barren circuitry. They came with swords. They came with axes, drenched in the oil of the incorrupt. They came metric and standard. May the code protect us from the Robo-Vikings.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Rathbone, creator and illustrator of Saga of the Robo-Vikings.
Hello, I'm Melissa Kaiser, writer of Saga of the Robo-Vikings. Our comic is about two separate but equal groups of robotic Vikings. It's a fantastic world of high robotic adventure.
This Kickstarter campaign, Attack of Saga of the Robo-Vikings, is an effort to raise resources necessary to publish the already created first part of the series into a 48-page book.
And this is where you come in. When you back our project and help us bring this saga to life, we've created some epic loot for you to enjoy.
With your support, we can help the Robo-Vikings destroy. I mean, conquer the world.
So head on over to Kickstarter, put in Attack of Saga of the Robo Vikings. It'll take you right to the project page, and you can sign up to make sure that you get yourself a copy. Well, and if you've listened to enough podcasts, you know that there is advertising. So the advertising helps me bring more stuff to you. And our first advertiser is our longtime advertiser, DreamHost.com. If you need a web host, DreamHost.com is the best, bar none, web host in the whole known universe. Just go to DreamHost.com, and if you put in the code CRAZY, KRAYZ, you get $20 off your first year. If you like snacks, and that pretty much is everybody in the human race, you want to have healthier snacks. You don't want to be spending your time going down to the vending machine, buying the ho-hos, buying the stuff that's really bad for you. You want good stuff that tastes good, but also stuff that's healthy. And you can get that at Graze.com. Graze.com has healthy snacks, interesting snacks, and they're reconfiguring their boxes so that you can get bigger boxes, you can get them more often, you can get them less often, you can customize them to the kind of snacks you want while still exploring into things you hadn't even known you'd like. And if you use the reward code, CORYS 3R5P, that's Corey S 3R5P, your first and fifth box is free. That's Graze.com. Do you shave your face or any other part of your body? Well, if you've gone to the grocery store or the drugstore or the Target or the Walmart or anything like that, you've looked at how much blades cost and you've lost your tiny little mind. I know that I lose my tiny little mind whenever I see the prices. So instead, I go to dollarshaveclub.com/crazy, and you can get a good razor with good blades delivered right to your door as often as you'd like for a low price. Just go to dollarshaveclub.com/crazy. If you like what you have heard, or you don't like what you've heard and you have some suggestions, feel free to email me at corey.strode@gmail.com. If you would like to advertise on Crazy Comics or Stories or SolitaireRose.com, you can email me at corey.strode@gmail.com, subject advertising. We're on the Facebook at Solitaire Rose Radio. We're on the YouTubes at YouTube/Corey.Strode. We're taking over the universe. And if you know someone or you are someone who has a good story, connected to comics or not, go ahead, email me at Corey.Strode@gmail.com. We're going to be doing more interviews. We're going to be doing more Kirby. We're going to be finally diving into the history of EC Comics again. And there's a lot more coming up over the coming year. We're coming into summer. With summer, there's more time to be outside, more time to be walking out on the paths, more time to have those headphones in and listen to podcasts. So, once again, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more stories.